Hey, students of life, welcome to HipHughes History. I thought we would talk a little bit today about American foreign policy and specifically how it relates to the events going on in Russia, Ukraine, Crimea. So let's put on our thinking caps and see if we can't giddy up some learning for you. Here we go. If you haven't watched my previous videos, I've done a video on the Ukraine protest movement, and I've done video on Crimea and how the Russians have basically taken over Crimea. So currently, today is March 16th, 2014. Crimea had their referendum today, and overwhelmingly, like 93% supposedly voted to align themselves with Russia. Surprise, surprise, water is wet. Now, outside observers have claimed that these elections were rigged, that double voting was going on, that people were showing up that weren't citizens of Crimea, maybe outsiders from Russia being bussed in. And of course, Russia's state TV has said that they have nothing to do with this. This is just kind of the honest feelings of the people of Crimea. And this is what Putin really is rested on. You have to remember that Putin has a democratic argument. His democratic argument is the right of people of self-determination, which is in the United Nations Charter. And he's been also talking a lot about this kind of idea of the Russian-speaking people of southern Ukraine and eastern Ukraine that really has the world watching. Is Putin going to go in under this claim of self-determination to take that former Soviet Union land back? And Putin keeps bringing up Kosovo. And of course, in the Kosovo-Serbian war, Kosovo claimed its right of self-determination to pry itself out of that relationship. So the Russians weren't very happy about that. So they're using that as the example to really kind of pry away Crimea and possibly southern and eastern Ukraine. There's been reports that the Russians have already crossed into southern Ukraine trying to grab some natural gas facilities, because you have to remember that Crimea is attached to the Ukraine. There's only two bridges in and out. So they're really reliant on southern Ukraine and eventually the government in Kiev to provide them with fuel and oil, electricity, all of that good stuff. So what are the American options at this point? Because, Putin has been really forceful in, claiming that he's not doing anything wrong and that he's just upholding the rights of self-determination. Well, we've been talking a lot of banter about possibly doing some type of sanctions or freezing the accounts or the assets of, Russian billionaires who have their money in Europe and not many in the United States, but that would be one way of approaching that. But you have to remember that Putin controls, enormous natural gas resources. John McCain today stated that Russia was just a natural gas company with a military. So if they wanted to cut off Eastern Europe, they could wreak havoc on economic markets across the world. Along with the option of sanctions is also, do we owe it to Ukraine? Should we be propping up the government in Ukraine, or is that getting our hands into that situation? Remember that protest movement, was claiming, democracy against tyranny. So do we owe it to the people who stood up in Ukraine? And some of those people are ultra-right nationalists that have, Nazi ties. We can't avoid that. Everything is gray. You have to remember that even though we might be clapping for that protest movement who stood up against that corrupt, tyrannical president, Viktor Yanukovych, you have to remember that they broke the Constitution in getting rid of him. So in a sense, it was an unconstitutional move to remove him. Does that mean that the current government in Ukraine is a non-constitutional government? I think that there's two sides, maybe three sides of every coin. Ultimately, it comes down to this. What's in the United States' self-interest? Are we still in this kind of Cold War lens where we really need to do something mighty? People have been claiming Obama is weak, and I would ask them, well, then what should we do? Should we send troops to the border? Is that what we should do? Should we be prepared to fight? And, there's an argument for that. Russian state TV basically made a nuclear threat, saying that Russia was the only one in the world that could turn the United States into radioactive ash. So they're definitely doing some warmongering over there, and that really is reminiscent of the 1980s. So do we need a Ronald Reagan? Do we need somebody to call Putin the evil empire and really, call their bluff by saying, look, if we want to go mano a mano, Sarah Palin made this kind of reference to the United States, being willing to use its nuclear arms against Russia. There's definitely a libertarian vibe in the Republican Party that's different from that. I know Rand Paul wasn't clapping for Sarah Palin. There's a House Republican side, some in the Tea Party, that might not think it's a good idea for the United States to even involve itself when it comes to sanctions against Russia. So there's also that argument that it's our best interest to, remain neutral. And this is none of our business. And look, we have Iraq blood on our hands. Who are we to be telling other countries what they should be doing with other countries? So there's definitely three big options. One would be going down this sanction route, working within the United Nations. Of course, that's very difficult because Russia has a veto on the Security Council, which they exercised today when it came to claiming mishap in this Crimean vote. So definitely muddled relationships in the United Nations. But should we do that sanction route? Or should we become more of that Ronald Reagan character and that, strength versus strength card, where we certainly have the largest military in the world, and if we wanted to flex our muscles, we could flex our muscles. But of course, there's many that have memories of Iraq and neocons, and that might not be the best option for them. Or do we just turn inward and just kind of, turn our shoulder to the whole thing? It really doesn't have a lot to do with the United States, when the United States really should be focusing on ourselves and our infrastructure and our own economic problems. Or is that, really a Neville Chamberlain move? Is that appeasement? And will Putin take that as a sign of weakness? There's just so much to talk about in here, guys. What do you think we should do? If you were Obama, what should you do? Is he being too weak? Is he doing the right thing? Should he need to be stronger? And if he needs to be stronger, are you willing to go down that route? Because that route means that you have to be prepared, I think, to go to war. So giddy up for the learning. I think I spooked myself a little bit. If you haven't checked out HipHughes history, you can click my face. Like, click my face right there. How about that? And you'll go off to HipHughes history. We have over 220 video lectures. You can grow your brain every day like a freaking chia pet. How about that for the giddy up for the learning? All right, guys, stay cray-cray on the internet. We'll see you next time. And remember, where attention goes, energy flows.